Please listen carefully to the following announcement. This is John Hudson, Superintendent. This video is not a joke. Viewer discretion is advised.
Has been around for quite some time, with the first origins relating back to the late 17th century of Eastern Europe. The legends of these supernatural beings began in countries such as Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, and Lithuania. The myths of vampires spread eventually to Western Europe, specifically Germany and England, where the myth became much more popularized. Though the legend of the vampire did not stay exclusive to Europe, despite European vampires being the most well known today. It spread as far as Japan, which by that point had morphed into a creature known as the Jiangshi, which was similar to European vampires in that it absorbed the life force of its victims. But in the Japanese lore, it was more of a necromantic creature, or a creature controlled by an outside malevolent force, unlike those of the fully sentient European variety. These vampires that existed in nothing but folklore at this point would eventually be popularized by a novel by the name of Dracula. It was a book written by Bram Stoker, an Irish writer who had grown up in Dublin and was a resident of London when he was working on Dracula. The works of Dracula would eventually come to fruition on May 26, 1897, and set in stone what a classic vampire was to be. The classic vampire is a creature of the night, facing mortal consequences if they dared face the light of day, not to mention their absolute power over wolves and the ability to transform to bats and wolves alike, along with the ability to subvert the will of others, slowly bending them to do whatever the vampire pleases. The ability to subvert others is demonstrated throughout the book, making Dracula himself exceptionally hard to deal with. Potentially the most terrifying part of classic vampires, however, was their insatiable lust for blood. It was their life source and near essential to their daily existence. Oftentimes, it left their victims weakened and drained if they lived at all. With blood came the power the vampires searched for. Though the powers of vampires stayed mostly the same throughout the ages, with some being altered through pop culture, such as sparkly vampires from Twilight, or the vampires from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or the vampires of many other books, games, and movies. One of the most notable differences when you look at modern vampires is how the vampirism is spread. In the original Dracula, it took several feedings and subversion of your mind to become a vampire. Now, in most fictions, all it would take to permanently become a blood-sucking demon that's too pale for its own good is a little prick on the neck. But that wasn't even the beginning for how far vampires would stray from the originals, such as stakes being required for their dispatchal. This is just a misconception for how to deal with vampires. In the book, it was found that a wooden stake was in fact mentioned several times, but, well, any old sharp object could do the job. Another silly misconception was Dracula's profound fear of garlic. Surely, a man of such renown, aside from being a blood-sucking demon, would indulge in some fine garlicky delicacies every now and then. A different perversion of the original vampires is that in some fictions, though this one isn't nearly as commonplace, is vampires being at such ridiculous levels of strength at their first turning, when in reality it took perhaps the original vampire and the strongest of them all centuries to develop that strength. His underlings would admittedly be stronger than the average human being, but not to the incredible levels of Dracula. But back to his origins. How did Dracula first acquire his power? To begin with, he was born to the noble order of the dragon in 1431. At this time, his home of the mountains of Transylvania was embedded into the kingdom of Wallachia. Due to his noble high birth and being in a militaristic order, when he came of age, he was pressed into service against the Ottoman Empire. He led an army in what was the key battleground between two of the world's strongest powers at the time, the famed Ottoman Empire and the Austrian Habsburgs. It definitely didn't help his case. His father's name was Dracul, which in turn caused his name to be Dracula, which when translated was son of the devil, which potentially spurred the legends surrounding his rule. In addition to this, he lived in an era of constant war and found that treachery, vindictiveness, and revenge ruled the day, which he took all of those to heart and became famed around the world as the one and only Vlad the Impaler due to his extraordinary cruelty showed both during and after battle. From 1448 to his death in 1476, Dracula ruled Wallachia. He lost and reclaimed his throne twice. Once, he reclaimed his throne against his own brother, which was not spared from his cruelty and was treated as any other enemy. Curiously enough, the Vatican praised Vlad for defending Christianity, even in the light of killing his own brother, but the church also disagreed with his methods, so it balances. Dracula would eventually earn the name of Vlad Tepes, pronounced Sepesh, or better known as Vlad the Impaler due to his common use of impaling captives and leaving them as warning for others. The stench and morale effect did have an effect on armies he had fought, as in one documented instance, Vlad had retreated into the Transylvanian mountains, and the Ottoman Sultanate, who he had just retreated from battle from, turned back from pursuing Vlad's army into the mountains due to the declining morale and the ever-present stench of rot on the march to pursue. This was only the first of his extraordinary acts of cruelty. There are more that are reported to have happened that are a bit too graphic to describe in a school video. During that time, it was believed that religious charity and a proper burial would erase sin and allow entry into heaven. Dracula attempted to atone for all of his heinous sins by surrounding himself with priests and monks, along with founding several religious monasteries. Over a period of 150 years, his dynasty would go on to found 50 monasteries, presumably to atone for what their grandfather did. Vlad was killed in battle against the Ottomans near Bucharest, which is the present-day capital of Romania. Vlad's head was displayed in Constantinople, the Ottomans' capital, as a sign of victory over Wallachia, after many years of war. The rest of Vlad's remains were buried in an isolated monastery near Bucharest, which was also likely a prison and torture chamber, as when prisoners prayed at a statue of the Blessed Virgin, a pitfall trap sprung and killed several of the prisoners. In 1931, archaeologists searched the monastery for Dracula's remains. A skeleton was found wearing clothing similar to how Dracula was typically portrayed in paintings of the time, with turquoise and golden tapestries, and with the symbol of the Order of the Dragon on the sleeve. The contents were taken to a museum in Bucharest, but have since disappeared without a trace, leaving the mystery of Dracula as just that, a mystery.
From the legacy of Vlad and Dracula, many other vampires were created, some even having completely different backgrounds. For example, Blade, a vampire hunter that was created by Marvel Studios, was born part vampire. Blade's mother was attacked by a vampire when she was pregnant with him. He is known to have all the strengths of a vampire, but had no weaknesses like the others did. This means that he had super strength, speed, agility, and healing powers without having to worry about sun or any of the stupidest things vampires are weak to, such as garlic. To avenge his mother, Blade set out to kill every vampire so the same occurrences would not happen to the others. In conclusion, Dracula inspired many of the movies and books made by modern-day giants, such as Disney and Marvel. Even though movies that starred vampires were known to be categorized as horror films and movies, modern-day entertainers have made these horrifying creatures to be humorous like Hotel Transylvania or action-filled like Blade. Some even hopping onto the long train of drama shows such as Vampire Diaries and Twilight.